What up and welcome to Something by Brian. I'm Brian and today I'm talking about the Dark Knight trilogy because I'm so excited for the new Batman and I'm not really sure why I'm making an excuse as to why I'm discussing these or any other Batman media for that matter. I could literally talk about him till the day I die. So as you can guess from that statement, I'm going to be highly biased as Batman is a character near and dear to my heart and my favorite superhero since, well, actually since one of the 3 movies I'm talking about today released. Don't get me wrong, I of course knew of him as a character and had seen some of the amazing animated series as well as some of the more questionable movies from the 90s, but this trilogy cemented him as a character I had to know more about and thus started my venture into the comics. Enough about my obsession with the Cape Crusader. Let's travel way back to a simpler time. The year is 2005. Friends ended a year ago, and sadly, the tragedy of 9/11 4 years prior lingers in most people's memory. Batman Begins is definitely a product of its time. The overwhelming focus on fear and terror is not subtle, and the want for a single person who could help make everything better is understandable and relatable. I was 14 when the movie premiered, and I didn't see it in theaters. I don't think I saw it until after The Dark Knight released actually. Anyways. The story is an intriguing and immersive take on the well-known origin of the vigilante who will be known as Batman. We start out with a young Bruce Wayne having a traumatic event. Not the one you're thinking about, that comes later. From here it starts jumping a bit in time, so we get to see all the various horrific things that happen that could result in a privileged trust fund kid making the decision to become a masked vigilante, dressed as a bat. His quest takes him all over and he ends up training with the best of the best. A mysterious league of ninjas hellbent on balancing the world. When Bruce and the league inevitably desires 2 different outcomes, Bruce splits and returns to Gotham. Here he starts using his wealth to develop gadgets and gear to better fight the corrupt underbelly of Gotham and take down crime. As quickly as he's starting to get results, a threat emerges more powerful than he would have thought imaginable and he's forced to count on allies and be tested to his very limit. The story is wonderfully engaging and pretty straightforward. As with most Nolan stuff, non-linear storytelling is to be expected, but I really think it suits the story well with the various flashbacks we're shown throughout the first 2 acts. It doesn't really break the pace as the flashbacks are always relevant and pushes the story forward. It is a powerful story about conquering one's fear and learning to live with it, and loss. As stated earlier, the very real-life fear of terrorism was still prevalent, and this movie was a great study of mass hysteria and fear-mongering and how dangerous that can be. The cast of this is absolutely stellar. Nolan had done some work before this picture, but wasn't necessarily a household name as he is today, and it's fun going back and watching this and the next 2 and see how many of Nolan's mainstays are featured. Michael Caine, Gary Oldman, Ken Watanabe, and Cillian Murphy are all great in this. Gary Oldman as Gordon might be one of the most inspired castings ever, closely rivaled with Michael Caine as Alfred. Of course Christian Bale went all out and his performance in this is amazing. As Batman he's menacing and physical and vicious, and as Bruce Wayne he's suave and intelligent. Many things have been stated about his gravelly bat voice. I like it just fine, some line deliveries more than others, but I must admit that I much prefer Kevin Conroy's adaptation in that aspect. Katie Holmes is perfectly fine as Rachel, but I do not mind the recast as I think Maggie Gyllenhaal overall is a much more talented actress, but more about her later. Liam Neeson is great as Bruce's mentor, threatening and wise, and later on he's very capable and believable in his actions. I can't help thinking if you'd cast Liam Neeson for this role now, there would be some sort of uproar and shitstorm about casting a middle-aged white guy for this part, and I kinda understand that. It does feel a bit odd going back. But maybe that's just me. Under all circumstances, he really does a great job. The addition of actors such as Rutger Hauer, Michael Caine and Morgan Freeman really lends this movie such credibility. It feels so grand and important compared to the Batman movie that came 8 years before it. A very clever move from Warner Bros. Indeed. And impressive that only 8 years had to pass before such a different take could outshine most that came before it. As mentioned, this is a Nolan movie. And it's a Nolan movie from before he went full Nolan and started examining what it even means to tell a story. Don't at me, Nolanites. I'm one of you and enjoyed Tenet, but Nolan needs to come back down. But he is an incredibly talented storyteller and director. He seems like a man with a certain vision and then the actual tools to create it. The production design of this movie is just perfection. Gotham is way cooler in this movie than in the rest of the Nolan Batman flicks. The train system running above ground, the truly gritty and disgusting narrows the climatic confrontation starts in, is wonderful ways to add a slightly comic-y feel to this highly realistic take on Batman mythos. The Batman himself looks best in this as well. I get why the costume changes in the sequels, but Batman just isn't as intimidating without his big bulky neck. And this Batman is intimidating. His batarangs that more resemble shurikens in this version, and the tumbler is such cool ideas translated so, I wanna say effortlessly, which I know isn't the case. Much research and design went into these final products, but they feel effortless and like a given. Of course that's the sort of vehicle a real Batman would be driving around in. The various locations are gorgeous, and the training session on the frozen lake, filmed in Iceland, is one of my favorite scenes ever. Beautifully shot and with the most magnificent backdrop. I might be spreading a rumor now, but the crackling of the ice was actually present since the production was struck by an unpredictable heat wave. I'm certain they added more in post or amplified whatever was present, but still, that's some impressive dedication from all involved. Next up, the probably highest regarded Batman, maybe superhero movie in the 21st century, The Dark Knight. This movie came out in 2008, the birth year of the MCU, and was very anticipated. The casting of the rom-com star Heath Ledger as the terrifying Joker was met with ridicule, but the continuation of the wonderfully realistic and gritty world Nolan had introduced us to 3 years prior was too enticing to not be excited about. This was the movie I had in mind earlier when stating one of these 3 films made Bats my favorite superhero. I was 17 when this released, and Joker became my Tyler Durden, a perfect agent of chaos and destruction with cool ideas I never could have imagined that I could channel all my teen angst and edginess through. Why so serious became the battle cry of my late teens. The story of this is pretty straightforward. Since Begins, a year and a half has passed, and Batman has worked like a charm. Crime rates are lower, and the mob is running scared. A new district attorney is helmed as a beacon of hope and light, and everything is just hunky-dory. That is, of course, until the mob releases an evil so unapologetic they don't understand it, and the Joker runs amok in the streets of Gotham, spreading chaos and mayhem with literally anything he does. Batman is tested beyond his capabilities, and even though physically he is far superior to this new foe, mentally, and more importantly, morally, he is outmatched and fighting a losing battle. The Joker is changing his plans and ways throughout, and a pattern cannot be deduced, so our great detective is at a loss and just 2 steps behind at almost every turn. Once their 2 ideologies collide in a grand spectacle, the Joker has an ace in his sleeve, and Batman is forced to confront past mistakes and make a grim choice. This movie is great, but it stands in the shadow of the utter brilliance that is Heath Ledger's Joker, which is totally deserved. Every praise that has ever been given that performance is correct. I am biased, swayed, and fully incapable of judging his performance fairly. This adaptation of the Joker is my favorite villain ever put to screen. He demands your attention whenever he's present, and he's truly haunting. I know some thinks people are too positive on this performance because of the tragic passing of Heath Ledger shortly before the release of this film. However, I just cannot see it. I've never before and never since seen an actor disappear into their character as seamlessly as Heath did. And with a character this challenging, that is a marvel in and of itself. The returning cast is all wonderful again. The chemistry between Batman, Harvey Dent, and Gordon is great. There's tension, and there's trust, and there's everything in between. The crime bosses are all great and wonderfully over the top in their mobness. I enjoy the juxtaposition of them and the Joker and their different levels of evil. Michael Caine and Christian Bale really sell the familial ties between their characters, and Alfred does feel as much as an ally in the vigilante endeavor as a caring and worrying father figure. The addition of Maggie Gyllenhaal as Rachel is stellar. She is hopelessly underused, and I'd love for her to be in more things. She is much more believable as the idealistic Rachel Dawes than Katie Holmes, at least in my humble opinion. Aaron Eckhart as Harvey Dent is really good. His strong jawline makes him perfect as the stoic attorney with a darkness inside. Also his acting chops, of course. But that jawline though. Nolan is of course back directing, and he is still really good at it. Complaints could be made about how he shot action back then. I feel like he's improved immensely in that aspect since the first 2 entries of this franchise. His dedication to practical effects, however, guarantees that the action he creates really is engaging to watch. Just sometimes a bit hard to follow. The costumes in this movie are wonderful. However, as stated earlier, I do believe it is a downgrade in the Batsuit. I miss the bulky neck, but I understand and appreciate the explanation given in the movie, and it made the Joker a more physical threat as Batman became more susceptible to stabbings. The effects on Two-Face are so gross looking, and just a great redesign of a classic villain. I like the acid look from comics and early adaptations just fine, but having an extremely serious burn is again just a bit more believable and realistic, even though this is pushing the realism of this world. But dang, it looks great. Gotham is downgraded in this, I feel. I like the realistic tone of this trilogy, but I must admit that Gotham had more character in the first film. I miss the above ground monorail thing, the gargoyles for Batman to perch on, and the foggy alleyways filled with corruption. Now it kinda sorta just looks like regular Chicago. And that's not a slight on Chicago. Chicago just isn't Gotham. Now it's time for the concluding chapter of the franchise. 4 years have passed since Batman's victory over evil, and it is time for him to rise. I saw The Dark Knight Rises 6 times in the cinema. I had tickets for the early showing on the release day, and straight after the movie ended, I went to the ticket stall and asked if they had more tickets for the next showing, and went directly back into the theater and watched it again. I absolutely adore this flick. Is it the weakest of the bunch? Probably. But there's just something about it though. The scope of it, the grandeur, the feeling of this, for me, a really formative franchise coming to a close. I just get giddy thinking about this movie, and it's probably one of the films I've seen most. 8 years have passed since the Batman was forced into hiding. The streets of Gotham are clean though, through a somewhat iffy new law. However, something strange is afoot, and Bruce is forced to rekindle the fire within and don the cape and cowl again. A masked mercenary is starting to ruffle the feathers of the elite in Gotham, and sadly some of the corrupt have helped him get very far. He's an infestation, and he's not leaving. A mysterious cat burglar is thinning the lines between friend and foe, and old allies are incapacitated or otherwise indisposed as new allies emerges. It is a big game of who can trust who, and in the middle of it all, the greatest physical threat Bruce ever has faced is looming ever larger. This story is a bit much. Bunch of new characters are introduced, some gets more time than others to make an impact, and the story ties back to the League of Shadows from the first one, resulting in it feeling much more like a planned trilogy, but still has some pretty big exposition dumps and oddly placed flashbacks. But the scale of the threat is immensely fun, and I thoroughly enjoy the trepidations Bruce has to endure. Tom Hardy joins the cast as Bane, and his physique is terrifying. I love that they went with the strongman look for Bane instead of totally ripped and sleek. I know people were all up in arms when the movie released about him being totally unintelligible or joking about him doing a bad Sean Connery impersonation. To me though, that's horribly nitpicky. I find his voice work incredibly menacing, and his stature mixed with his good manners makes him an imposing figure, and one I myself find hard not to take seriously. I can recite most, if not all, his lines by heart, and did so frequently, to the chagrin of those around me. Other than Tom Hardy, more Inception alumni joined the cast. Marion Cotillard and Joseph Gordon-Levitt are Batman's newest allies, and I enjoy both of them. However, at a single but ever so significant moment, Marion Cotillard is, I'm gonna say it, straight up laughable, which on rewatches in particular kinda takes you out of the movie. Ben Mendelsohn is in this. I always forget because this was before he was like the go-to villain and everything, but he shares the screen with Bane in one of my favorite scenes of all time, the "Do you feel in charge" scene. Such a powerful scene that cements Bane's ruthlessness. Anne Hathaway's Selina Kyle is also perfection, and she's really cool in this role. I love this take on the character, and she's just a badass through and through, and you believe that she could exist in this world and go toe-to-toe with Batman, mentally and physically. Quite a feat. In the returning cast, Michael Caine takes the cake for me in this one. Not that the others aren't stellar as always, but he has some truly gut-punching, heartbreaking scenes that he just fully delivers on. Also, I don't think I've sung Christian Bale's praises high enough yet, by the way. What one have to remember when marathoning this trilogy is that, as I've tried to make evident throughout this video, a long time passed between each installment, and between these, Christian Bale shot other stuff. For example, The Machinist and The Fighter, in which he dropped his body weight down to 111 pounds or 50 kilos and 145 pounds or 65 kilos respectively, before just getting ripped as heck again for these 3 films. That's dedication you only can be impressed by. Nolan is back again, and I've forgotten to mention Hans Zimmer scored all 3 of these films and did so absolutely brilliantly, but I'd argue his score for this one, with the help of Junkie XL, is the best. Just immaculate work. And I dunked on Nolan earlier, stating his action wasn't particularly good, mainly due to it being chopped to pieces in the editing. but in this he really seems to understand how to clearly frame, film and show action. The fights between Bane and Batman is visceral and beautiful, and the grand scale battle sequences are easy to follow and very impressive. The CGI in these movies is minimal, but of course it's present in modern blockbusters, and the way it's used in this movie is very seamless, enhancing the already impressive practical stuff ever so slightly. Gotham becomes a bit more like the Gotham I know and love from Begins and from the comics in this one, but not until after Bane's plan is pretty far along. But I love it. I love the sewer setting too, and also the pit. What a set piece, and lots of world building. I also really appreciate that in all of these films Cillian Murphy returns as the Scarecrow. It just makes the world feel so much more lived in and real, and the costume for him in this might be the best yet, even though the sack is missing. Bane's costume as well is just perfection. I think changing his tubes from liquid steroids like in the comics to pain-killing gas, ensuring he doesn't feel a thing, is a stroke of genius, and just once again shows the creativity that went into turning this world and Batman's impressive rogue gallery ever so slightly more realistic. Also, I wanted a coat like Bane's for literal years. Never found one I looked good in though. So now we're here, 10 years since The Dark Knight rose this summer. Do they hold up? Yes. Yes, yes, and once more for the ones in the back, yes. Do they show their age? Also yes. But only ever so slightly. And we've been spoiled with multiple superhero features ever since 2010, so the competition in look and feel has risen. As I've stated multiple times, I think the action, particularly in the first two, isn't the greatest, but other than that, I've almost no complaints. Is both the Joker's and Bane's plans a bit convoluted and convenient? Absolutely. Does it distract or take away from the overall story? Not one bit. I rewatched all three films this weekend, and I was as captivated and engaged as the first time I saw them. I don't have any problem stating that this is still the best superhero trilogy ever. By a lot. Also, just a random little thought to end on. Did Christian Bale ever get a Bat name? Like Ben Affleck became Batfleck, and Robert Pattinson is Robert Battingbat. Did Christian Bale ever get one? He oughta. He definitely deserves one. Thanks for watching this. Next video will be a draw view for Matt Reeves' new The Batman. I can't wait to see Edward Cullen kick some Riddler butt. Anyways, and as always, if you like the drawing, consider liking the video, and if you like the video, consider subscribing. Until next time, take care.